see there's absolutely no interest in that from the general staff this morning, but anything that anybody wants to mention about that, please feel free.
Well, yeah, I was kind of afraid Chris Peck would take some cheap shots by, criticizing something, but I'm glad he made it clear that he wasn't going to criticize those things.
That was good that he got that out of the way.
I kind of applaud him for that.
Okay.
Hey, in seriousness, though, as someone who wasn't here when all this was going on and has no idea exactly what went on or didn't go on, it was a little bit offensive for him to dismiss it as, oh, this just wasn't a big deal and let's just get over it. I've talked to so many people, when I tell them that I work at the paper, immediately see me as a tool of the Coles Company. And for someone who, coming to this paper, I was very excited about the fact that it was not a corporate-owned paper. That was very important to me. And I think, the business ownership of newspapers is one of the biggest problems we face. And to have people view me in that way as a sellout to this wealthy family is something that just pisses me off every day. For him to just sort of say, oh, let's just move on, nothing to see here. People still see everything we do through that lens. And I'm not talking about tinfoilers. I mean, these are reasonable, educated people who should know better.
Incredibly educated.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're exactly the kind of people that we are trying to reach.
Yeah.
So, I was still a little bit stunned. I suppose sort of like Ken. I mean, I followed it because it's my hometown, but I was thousands of miles away. I find it hard to believe that somebody would put themselves on record as saying there's nothing to apologize for, and that's just, history shows that's completely wrong. And anyway.
Well, from somebody who's been here for 40 years, almost.
Really, that long? Isn't it time to retire?
Tomorrow's fine. Whoa! Yeah, I can.
Go ahead.
I can work it out if HR can. What I can tell you is that this has been going on in this community long before that project over there, because the Coles have always been looked at as a wealthy family who wants to run the town, and whether they do or don't, they own a lot. They have a lot of property. And I mean, years ago there were lots of things that people could, from Stacy's grandfather. I mean, during the war, Stacy's grandfather, for instance, they lived in a mansion down here in Brown's Addition. It was a beautiful place. It was torn down and became that condominium project. But before that, it was a beautiful place, sat out over on the river. It had a tennis court, also had a fuel tank underground so they could pump gas into their own cars. I mean, there's always been things like that. So River Park Square, of course, was, I mean, I'm not belittling the problems and the problems that the newspaper went through and how it was covered and all the rest of it, but that feeling in the community is not new. It's always been there, and I can't imagine it'll ever go away. And even though there's people that are wealthier than they are, they have the property and all the rest of it, and the newspaper. So, I mean, I don't think you just. I know exactly what you're saying, but it doesn't piss me off. I'm used to it. It's just part of working here.
But it took you 40 years to get to that point.
Well, no, 35.
Oh, okay.
So that's why you've been smiling the 5 years I've been here.
Yeah.
If it takes me that long, I'll be 90.
You don't want to be there. Not that long.
Well, the only thing I would say, having been in the newsroom at the time, as Larry was, and I guess nobody else at the table was, it doesn't square with the new perception within the newsroom itself.
What does?
His statements to the effect that everything was above board.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. I mean, my God, it certainly was not above board. I mean, but I can understand why he's saying what he is too. I mean, and actually, the one part I agree with is that I agree big time that it's time to move on.
Well, I think there's no question about that, but I think what this accomplishes in some way is it at least gives us a little bit of credibility to approach a story if something similar to this comes up and say we're going to do it differently, because we've done as much, I think, introspection as humanly possible, and whether or not the same thing could happen again, who knows? But at least we'll have a footing to say whatever happened is in the past now.
Oh, I'm sure it will happen again. I can't imagine it won't.
But I mean, the way, you know what I mean.
Right. But I mean, a similar story where because of their property ownership, things like that, I mean, it has to happen again.
Oh, sure. Rich people do what rich people do.
Yeah.
Jordy, as another long-time kind of institutional newsroom voice, do you have any thoughts about what we're talking about?
No, I was in the sports department.
That's a pretty good defense, Jordy.
And the only thing I will say is that, as a 35-year person here, that Larry's absolutely right. Having lived here for 56 years, the Cowles family has always been vilified long before that series, before they bought Park Square.
Well, we're going to do a brown bag today, and again, I don't know if anybody has that much interest in it. I'll say that my hope was that this would be a bookend that would, in some ways, close the River Park Square chapter in the newsroom. It never gets closed in the community. It's going to be part of our legacy, and we'll have to deal with it. I'm not sure that anything that's been written in the last 2 weeks changes meaningfully perceptions out there. Chris is certainly, fairness alone dictated that he had a chance to say his piece, and I absolutely respect that. I'm glad he was able to write for publication. The audit does one meaningful thing, the most meaningful thing that comes out of that audit, as I've said before, and the reason that I consider it worth every bit of money we spent in hiring the council and the time and the intense effort that went into it. Stacy is on the record, in public, in writing, in a way that he's not been before. He has been in private, but he's never been as public in his statement that the newsroom has absolute and total independence in covering the family's business. And that public statement is an important statement for me and for every future editor of this newspaper while Stacy is publisher. And it becomes our shield, in a sense, our protection against meaningful interference. It will never necessarily affect the perception, but it will certainly affect the practical nature of our coverage of the family's affairs. And that alone is critically important to me, and I'm thrilled to have it. I'm thrilled he said it. I'm thrilled he put it on the record. For that reason, I consider this a successful bookend. I did want to, if staff folks show up at noon, I'll say this then as well. This is not a Peck Smith thing. I don't frame it that way any more than I frame the Mayor West as Smith West. I never set out with this audit to point a finger at Chris, never mentioned Chris in anything that I've written about it. And this is not a case where the staff has to feel that they need to show some loyalty to the new regime because they worked in the old regime. It doesn't work that way. People find their place in a newsroom based on what we're doing now, and their ability to accept and be part of the values that we try to embody, the mission that we try to accomplish, the goals we have for our newspaper. And in that sense, it doesn't matter to me, doesn't bother me whether people agree or disagree with Chris at all. It really doesn't. It's being okay with what we're trying to accomplish now that really matters in the end. And so I hope people do feel free to talk about it amongst themselves if they feel it's valid or important. Not worried that anybody's keeping score, because we're not. I'm not.
I think there is a lot of that feeling now in the newsroom. It doesn't go outside the newsroom. think there's a lot of, especially from my point of view from the other side, it's like a pissing match. The way the retort came back, it sounded like a Smith-Peck thing to me, and I think a lot of people will view it that way, whether they want to say it or not. People who were here, and I think if it was just Chris Peck being down in Memphis, maybe not. But since there's so many ex-staffers that are down there too, I think there's a little bit of that, quite a bit of that actually. That's how when I read it, I kept getting that sense. And I don't know if people want to talk about that, but I think it's out there. And I don't know if it goes both ways, but I definitely have the sense it's coming down there, a little bit of, pissiness.
There's been some of that from the get-go. Our people who've encountered the Memphis folks at conferences come away with some of that. I'd like to think we've never directed it from here, but I can't. Everybody's got to draw their own conclusions. How do I deal with that, Joe?
Well, I don't
or do I even
worry
bother?
About it. I don't think you do. To me, I don't think you even worry about it. There's nothing you can do to control it anyway. And there's nothing you can ever say that'll change the perception anyway, or reality. You just won't. You just gotta live with it, I guess. Because there's always going to be people that were loyal, both, that had strong feelings. Loyalty is maybe a bad word. Just had, they worked with the guy for a long time, and a lot of the people that are there for a long time. And they'll never just drop those feelings for him. They have some close ties with him, and so there's always be a sense of that. Plus, who's ever boss always gets the shit. You know that. You can never avoid that. You wouldn't become an editor if you wanted to avoid that. So I don't think there's anything you can do about it.
Just wallow in it.
Yeah.
Anything else on this? Again, we're going to have a little bit of a brown bag this